So I just saw Game of Thrones' latest episode, The Bells, and I was electrified. I mean, every scene I had the pleasure of viewing gave me goosebumps. The cinematography was gorgeous enough that any screenshot would have made an amazing wallpaper, and the soundtrack was phenomenal, while other battles such as the Battle of the Bastards and the Battle of Gold Road were epic in their own right. This was definitely David and Dan's most ambitious episode of the entire series. But we're not here to talk about the cinematography or the soundtrack. The direction of the season, and pretty much the last 3 seasons, has divided many fans. Ever since the show went past the content of George Martin's books, some of the choices the characters have been making have been uncharacteristic. It is no secret that the penultimate episode of the series has left many viewers bewildered and outright angry. And most of this is because of what Daenerys Targaryen actually does. Her actions in this episode have been received with a lot of flack. Yet after watching it, I just can't bring myself to agree with most of the hate. I actually truly believe that Daenerys' character has been the best, and if not the most believable, out of the entire series straight through, and I'm going to explain why. Now obviously to do that, I'm going to have to be going right into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen The Bells, then go see it. If you have, then join me as I give an in-depth analysis of the Mother of Dragons, and hopefully to get you to understand that this episode isn't as bad as everyone is making it out to be. Now before we get into it, I want to come out and say that I'm not here to put Game of Thrones' recent writing on a pedestal. I definitely agree that a lot of the writing direction after season 5 have been questionable. I'm still pretty salty that they got rid of Littlefinger after making him out to be this enigmatic and important villain. I felt like they killed off most recent characters just to make the overall plot more manageable. And as much as I wanted to like the final battle with the Night King, I was so disappointed. I mean, come on, what was that? But all that can't compare to the confusion I felt when Jaime Lannister, after years of character building, decides to do a complete 180 and go back to Cersei. He went from being a total piece of shit to being one of my favorite storylines to follow, and they ruined it. I'm going to be comparing Jaime and Daenerys later on because I want to further highlight what makes a good believable character and what doesn't. So in the latest episode of Game of Thrones, Daenerys makes the final assault with her armies into King's Landing rather easily. She somehow gets past all the scorpions surrounding the city and completely decimates the Golden Company, allowing Jon Snow and the remaining forces to sack the city. What surprises everyone, however, is that once the bells are rung, signifying the surrender of Cersei's forces, instead of calling off the attack, Daenerys takes to the skies and starts burning the entire city, including the innocent. It's at this point that most viewers are fed up with David and Dan's writing and call blasphemy. That isn't what the Mother of Dragons is about, they say. What is the point of her storyline if she was going to go bad? This is just adding shock value to neatly tie up the end of the series. Some even say that her becoming the Mad Queen makes sense, only that they clearly rushed it. But here's the thing, that's the point of a snap. She suddenly breaks down under the pressure and does the unthinkable. And her breakdown makes complete sense. She just went from having everything to losing it all shortly after arriving in Westeros. In order to understand how her snapping was an amazing plot device, you have to understand why she snapped. And to understand why she snapped, you have to understand Daenerys as a character throughout the series. The best way to describe how I see Daenerys Targaryen is that she is just one giant allegory of a child stuck in an unforgiving world. When she first started her journey in Essos, her story was almost biblical. She went from being sold into slavery and being married off, to freeing slaves and being viewed as a savior to the people, amassing thousands of followers. But think about the Breaker of Chains journey through her eyes. There's no denying she had a harsh life growing up in the free cities alongside her abusive brother, but there is one thing that kept her going: the Iron Throne. This was originally an end goal for her brother Viserys, but considering that they were together most of their lives, his ideals pretty much leaked into her. He would whisper to her bedtime stories of how they were the rightful rulers and how the Lannisters betrayed their father. He is pretty much the first person who implanted the idea of the Messiah complex in her head, and certainly not the last. Once she gets married off to Khal Drogo, things really start looking up for Daenerys Stormborn. I want to make it clear that I understand that she did not want to be married off, and that Drogo clearly raped her. But in the end, whether it was right or wrong, Daenerys did fall in love with him, and he made things happen for her. He killed her brother because she was tired of his bullshit. He promised her to sail to Westeros to claim the throne because she wished it. This was just the start of a soon-to-be cycle of people in Essos obeying her every command, feeding her vision of ruler. And once Khal Drogo dies and she emerges from the flames carrying 3 baby dragons, things really start to kick off for her Messiah complex. I mean, who could blame her? She had many followers explain to her that the dragons were thought to be extinct, and that this must be a sign that the throne is her rightful destiny. After that, she did something that no one else has ever done. She went city to city freeing slaves, amassing an army, gaining more and more followers at a rate that was unheard of. I really liked the last episode of the 3rd season where a crowd of free slaves lift Dany up chanting Misa, Mother. This really highlights how Daenerys is beginning to see the fruits of her labor, and that her dream of ruling the throne was ever closer to being realized. It's axiomatic that anyone's ego would shoot through the roof after experiencing something like that. And that ego, along with its eventual collapse in Westeros, is what eventually leads to her final act of fire. Once the Mother of Dragons crosses the Narrow Sea, she soon realizes that things are very different on the other side of the world. While Essos was still a land of savagery, it was also home to many free cities that were all relatively easy to conquer, with 3 dragons of course. Westeros, on the other hand, held a savagery in its politics. While Daenerys had her advisors to make political admonishments, it was clear she was going to have a lot more trouble gaining favor here. Again, I want you to view Daenerys as a child, because with adolescence comes immaturity. Even though she had been through much misfortune, she always came out on top, with more than what she started with. And she always had people to watch her back. Every time she was in a tough situation, she knew she had her followers or her dragons to come save her. So once she got to Westeros, those same outcomes were to be expected. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the people of the North would not budge. They already had a proclaimed leader, Jon Snow. The show made it a point to juxtapose the two as saviors, except that Jon Snow was a man of his people, and Daenerys was just a woman here in Westeros. And while I'm not a female, I can tell you with confidence that anyone lessening my achievement just because of my gender would make me furious. A lot of people were saying that her decline into madness was too rushed, but Season 8 had plenty of moments showcasing her overall frustration from the people's general indifference towards her. Even her trusted advisors started to fail her, like Tyrion choosing his brother over her. Then came the deaths. Once Ser Jorah was killed and Missandei executed, Daenerys' world was turned upside down. Other than her army, she had no friends, almost no followers, only one dragon, and advisors she couldn't trust. Sound familiar? The Mad King was in a very similar situation during his reign, and killed a lot of people because of his lack of trust and paranoia. At this point, you can bet your ass Daenerys Stormborn is paranoid. Now to get to the main point. Why is everyone saying that her snapping and killing all those people in King's Landing was out of character, when the show made every effort to prove otherwise? She was a good person, but she was also a ticking time bomb. Throughout her years gathering her army, she had people tell her how great she is, how beautiful she is, and how this is her destiny. She didn't get any of that in Westeros, other than from Jon Snow, and even that was taken from her once he found out about his bloodline. This is just your typical situation of fans wanting the showrunners to hand the story to them on a silver platter. I'm sorry, if you think that the show rushed Daenerys' descent into madness, she spent days in her chamber after Missandei was killed, refusing to eat or talk to anyone. Don't you think this was the perfect time for her to plan revenge? Did people want an internal monologue? Many were saying that the bells ringing caused her to reach her final breaking point, and this didn't make sense. But my theory is that this time spent brooding at Dragonstone was the moment she decided no more Mr. Nice Gal. She knew she was going to fly to King's Landing to burn it to the ground. The show foreshadowed it many times. I mean, hell, she even says at one point she will take what is rightfully hers through fire and blood. When Jon recoils from her kiss, she tells him that she will rule with fear. That look on her face when Missandei was executed which by the way was an amazing performance by Emilia Clarke, was a look of pure rage and revenge. This was someone who couldn't get what she wanted, even though everyone told her she would. Daenerys was not ready for the wickedness of Westeros. Leaders like Cersei and Sansa had the qualities and knowledge the Breaker of Chains just didn't have. Daenerys' character was done so well. I know a lot of people were Team Dany and wanted her to be the main heroine, but there's nothing I love more than a well-developed villain that you can empathize with, which is something that this show does so well. No one is truly bad here. They simply made their choices based on their experiences. Now, if we're going to talk about some bad character development at all, there's Jaime Lannister. He did horrendous things in the beginning just to be with his sister, but eventually grows to become a generally good guy. So for writers to go ahead and have him go back to Cersei, just because Sansa makes a small remark about them, shows how badly they wanted to close up his story by poetically having two siblings die together. But this is a good example of how this sudden shift in character was done wrong. His entire arc was about building new friendships and finding out how terrible of a person his sister was. There was no indication that Jaime was going to go back because everything was going well for him. Daenerys, on the other hand, was implied from the beginning that she had the possibility of becoming a mad ruler just like her father. So it's not that big of a surprise to see her turn a city into ash when she has seemingly lost everything. Now, a lot of people are thinking if Dany wanted revenge, she could have headed straight to the tower where Cersei was at and burned her right then and there. But think of it from a person who saw her best friend's head chopped off in front of her. She wanted to hurt Cersei, and I mean hurt her. No one in the city cared for her, and she knew that. This was no different than when Daenerys was in Meereen, a city, might I add, where she had 163 great masters killed, an act that she justified as answering injustice with justice. This type of unpredictability was present in her character all along. She just never had to fuel her hate because everything she was doing worked. So there it is. Daenerys becoming the Mad Queen was not uncharacteristic. She's a well-developed character that should be acknowledged and appreciated. I'm not trying to call others' opinions dumb, but rather get people hyped for the ending. This show had a great run. David and Dan may have made some terrible blunders, but at least they aren't trying to drag it out. They are loving the money though, seeing as they already announced a prequel in the works. But it is clear they are giving the series finale their all. The amount of money they put into last week's episode, building all these props only to see them torn down, is real commitment. I know how it feels to hate the direction a show is going, especially when you invested so much time into these characters, but the point of this video is to hopefully get you to see that light again, because at the end of the day, that's why we watch shows, for enjoyment. That's not to say I'm not worried, but I really am excited to see how emotional this fight with Daenerys and Jon will be, especially since both characters are so well written. I hope you've enjoyed this analysis. This is my first one, so feel free to leave some feedback, things I could have done better. I hope I actually made sense. This Sunday we'll all finally know who gets to sit on the Iron Throne. Or maybe no one does. In any case, thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.
High in the halls of the kings who are gone, Jenny would dance with her ghosts, the ones she had lost and the ones she had found, and the ones who had loved her the most, the ones who'd been gone for so very long, she couldn't remember their names. They spun her around on the damp old stones, spun away all her sorrow and pain. And she never wanted to leave, 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 never wanted